Danielle, thank you
Hey,
for coming to 20-Minute Leaders.
thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So where are you calling from right now?
I live in Oakland, California. Our offices are in San Francisco, but we're not going in there right now. So yeah, just working from home.
Right. No, yes. I'm in Southern California, and it's just crazy times, and I'm sure it's you know it's at 1517 fund. You feel it quite strongly, and I'd love to just jump right in. We know each other from about 6 years ago through a Teal Fellowship weekend that I attended in
Yeah.
downtown Las Vegas, which was really transformative for me. Peter Thiel was also there, and I remember some of my best friends until today, Dave Fontenot and Nada Wang. They're from that summit.
Yep.
And I'd love to just start. Tell me a little bit about your background, how you got to help start something called the Teal Fellowship, and
Yep.
then move on to 1517.
Yeah. So if someone had asked me 10 years ago if I would be in venture capital, I would have, or if someone had said you'll be in VC, I would have said, what's VC? I didn't know anything about the industry. So my career has taken lots of twists and turns. I worked in alternative education, both as a private tutor working with homeschoolers. I opened a charter school in San Diego that serves 400 students. We've been
Wow.
around for about 13 years at this point.
There's
And
400 students now
yep,
active. Wow.
active.
Okay.
Yep. Nope.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's been amazing to have something that, I was on the founding team and co-directed the school for the first 2 years, and I'm still on the board, so I'm still active in that sense, but it's amazing to have something that I've handed off operationally, that I'm not in the day-to-day of anymore. And I'm sure a lot of founders have had that experience with their companies as well, where eventually, one thing that we see that's interesting is eventually, you go from being a team with a name that you call yourselves to a company.
Right.
And that transition is really interesting. But to answer your question about the fellowship, I had worked in alternative education for quite a while. I had moved up to the Bay Area. I didn't know what I was going to do exactly. I had moved up here for an old boyfriend. I lived in Southern California at the time. And I got a call one day from a woman who worked at the Teal Foundation, and her exact words to me were, Danielle, they're launching this program. They've lost their minds. They need somebody who knows how to work with young people, someone who knows how to do operations. Like, you are perfect for this. You should get over here as soon as possible. I was like, wow, that's interesting. I was like, who launches a program without having all their sort of
Right.
ducks laid out and everything's ready
So
to go?
what is the Teal Fellowship program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Teal Fellowship program, which started in 2010, so 10 years ago at this point, was about this idea that maybe university isn't the only path for young people to move forward with. The cost of college has been going up year after year. Students are taking on a lot more debt. And Peter had this creative idea of, well, what if you gave a young person, maybe instead of asking them to spend $100,000 on school, what if you gave them $100,000 to work on something important for 2 years in science and technology? And so it was this open question. It was also this question of, can we replicate finding successful young people out there? And Silicon Valley, has some history of doing this with people like Mark Zuckerberg, Patrick Collison, of course, the greats like Microsoft and Apple.
Sure.
And so it was just this hypothesis and question of can we find more people like this? And so we put out a call to applications in 2010. During that year, we only had 400 people apply. We picked 20 young people. We gave them a $100,000 grant over 2 years to work on a science or tech project. And there were really only a couple rules. One rule was that you couldn't be enrolled in university at the time, and you couldn't have a full-time job somewhere else. So we really wanted people to learn by doing, launch new things, and see what they could do. It was really amazing.
For 18-year-olds who were just out of high school, or was there a range?
So at the time we said 19 and under. I think we could technically take applicants who were 16 at the time. I remember we had some people who were younger than that. In fact, someone who is a current Teal Fellow uh, Shahid Khan. He was in our inaugural applicant batch, and I have an old screenshot of him from he sent in a YouTube video of himself I think he was about 15, maybe 14 years old, and he had sent it in. We were like, wow, we can't take this guy now, but this is pretty cool that we have really young people applying. And then I think it was something like maybe 7-ish years later, he became a Teal Fellow. so at the time it was 19 and under. Now the program, I believe, is 22 and under.
So I have to ask, because, you take 18, 19-year-olds, and I'm now 24, but in the Israeli military, I was a commander of a team of about 8 to 10, 18, 19-year-olds. And, I'm trying to imagine giving some of them $100,000 and saying, go nuts. You had this great proposal. Now make it a reality.
Yep.
How do they know how to do this? This is a lot of responsibility, more money than most will ever see in their bank account.
Yeah.
How do you handle this responsibility as an 18 or 19-year-old?
Sure, exactly. Great question. I think for a lot of people, it was really life-changing in that moment, because it was one thing to write an application and say, hey, I want to do X. It was another to say, hey, you're being granted this thing that you want. Now let's do the hard work of moving it forward.
Right.
Ideas are a dime a dozen, but execution is really everything. With the grant, we didn't give out the 100K all at once. That would have probably not been a great idea.
Sure.
So we've done stipends monthly. We've done stipends quarterly on that. With the fellowship, we would do, sort of like quarterly high-level check-ins, almost like a board meeting or a mentor meeting with people. We did regular check-ins outside of that all the time with people to talk about, like, hey, how would you move this forward? What's your next step? One thing that we talked about a lot in terms of selection is we were looking for people who both had like a big vision of something that they wanted to do in the future. We used to ask this question on the application of, what do you want to accomplish within 10 years? But then there was another question we asked, what do you want to accomplish in two years? And then there was another question was, what do you want to accomplish in the next 2 months? And the reason we asked about that question was because by the time we were going through the application cycle, we could see like what happened with that. It didn't mean like, oh, this person's great if they got it done. It just means like, what did they learn? Did they figure out they had to pivot on something? Did they figure out that it's working out and now they know the next step? So we needed people who both could see that big vision, but also had boots on the ground to be able to understand what to do. I mentor a lot of young people, and a lot of young people have the big 10-year vision, but then you ask them, hey, what are you going to do on Friday to get there? And they're like, I have no idea. So scaffolding how you do something is important. And we worked with people a lot to do that. And then in addition, as the application cycles went on, we learned about, it was easier for people to scaffold things when they had already gotten started on it. I used to liken it to marathon running. I think the first year of the program, we were kind of saying, hey, marathons are really cool. You are probably going to really like running one. We're going to pay you to run one. The second year, the messaging was a little bit more like, hey, are you already running a marathon?
Yep.
We're here with resources for you to run that marathon. And I think that was more clear. But we've had people from the first class, the second class, who have done very, very, very well. People like Ritesh Agarwal of Oyo Rooms. People like Vitalik Buterin, I think he was in the third class with Ethereum. People like Dylan Field, he was in the second class with Figma. Dylan definitely fit that like already running the race mold, because he was already wanting to work on Figma and already doing it a little bit.
Yeah.
But then we also had people from the first group who came in and they were kind of feeling out what was going to happen. And so then we had people like Paul Gu with Upstart. He was on the founding team of that, and it took him some months to figure out, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to spend my time?
And I have two fantastic friends who went through the Teal Fellowship program, Ido Gino from Rapid API and Jihad Kawats, and they couldn't talk enough about how amazing it was. Both, obviously the grant is great, but the partnerships that they formed through this program and the community that they joined is remarkable. And I could talk about the Teal Fellowship for hours, but we only have 20 minutes, and I need to know your progression from there.
Sure.
Now 15, 17.
Yeah.
What is it? And there's some interesting shtick in it that's different from other funds. So
absolutely. So when Michael and I were running the Teal Foundation and the fellowship, we saw some interesting patterns. And one of those patterns was that when young people were out there raising money, it was hard to find investors who would take them seriously and hard to find investors who would come in early. And what we would notice is that we would email investors and say, hey, will you look at so-and-so's pitch deck? Will you give them some feedback? Now, I'm an educator by background. And so like giving feedback and offering
Right.
like an iterative process, I love that. I think it's great. But a lot of investors want to see something in sort of primo, like it's the right time, come talk to me at this point in your progression.
Yep.
And I get that they can't talk to everybody all the time. But what we noticed was that some of our fellows were really having extraordinary outcomes like the ones I mentioned before. And we said, why are we sending this deal flow on to other investors when we have all this information and we could start our own venture fund to work with young people, and not just the people who are fellows, but even the applicant pool. Like you mentioned the Teal Summit, we hear from people all the time who came to our old events who were not fellows, but were applicants who came, they met other young people like them. A lot of times we would hear the phrase from people, I don't get to meet other young people like me, people who are starting businesses, people who are inventors, people who are doing more than school, were really hard for them to find. And so we said, we think we could support more than 20 people a year with a venture fund and really repackage the fellowship as a 2.0. We took this idea to Peter in 2015. We said, hey, we have loved working with you and with the fellowship, but we really want to repackage this as a venture fund. We'd love your blessing to leave the foundation. He gave us his blessing, and he came in as an investor into our first fund and now into our second fund that we're on. It was an amazing moment. I remember when he committed, I smiled so big I covered my mouth. Like I didn't know what to do.
I mean, that's just the biggest vote of confidence possible. Having worked with him, and such a noteworthy guy who did such incredible things, and working with him in the Teal Fellowship, and then saying, "I'd love just your blessing for me to go and do this thing that I believe in." And then he says, "You know what? It's not even that. I want to be a part of this, and I believe in your success." That's incredible.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing moment. And we went out and we, in our first fund, we raised money from 30 other investors who were individuals and family offices who also had that same belief. And so now we have been able to work with alum fellows, current fellows, people who are old applicants, other young people we meet. Now we're meeting a lot of people through Zoom. Typically we go to campuses a lot and meet people on campus, because one of our things that you mentioned earlier is our grant program. So one thing that we saw, and you've sort of mentioned something in the vein of validation a number of times, of that it's not that giving a young person $1,000 grant, which we do somewhat regularly, is a lot of money for them to work with, but it's the validation of that someone out there believes in them. Someone says, hey, you know what? Like we'd have a young person come to our booth. It would just be a table at a hackathon and say, hey, I really want to work on, this project I have. And we say, oh, like, what do you need to buy to do that? Or like, how would you stretch $1,000 to get that to work? And they tell us about it. And for us, we'd also be sort of looking at like, hey, does this person have some of the traits we look for in people? Like insatiable curiosity is one. Like, is this person really passionate and interested in all kinds of things? And we've been able to get a pretty good read on people after even just a few minutes of talking with them. And we would say we call it a fairy godmother moment. Be like, guess what? Give me your Venmo. Like, we're going to send you $1,000 right now. And so it's a Venmo or PayPal payment. Yeah. We make it really simple. There's no paperwork. We don't own anything.
That's crazy. I mean, I should have gone to these hackathons, but
and we take these pitches, these grant pitches over Zoom and things like that. And now here's the really interesting part. So you think this is interesting that we do this fairy godmother moment. What's interesting to me is that people have turned around with those grants and built some really amazing things. And 20% of our Fund One portfolio started as grantees with us.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
20% of your portfolio is from these $1,000 investments?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's been really nice. We even had, we had a young woman who actually came to our Teal Summits who got a grant from us who raised so much money after she got our grant that we couldn't even participate. It just didn't make economic sense for us. But we were like, hey, you're off to the races. She's Marie Schneegens. She's a French entrepreneur.
Wow.
Her app that she was building at the time was called Never Eat Alone. It was for people who work in large enterprise to meet with each other over lunch. It started as this sort of small product, But she really built it out into an HR tool. I can't remember exactly what they're called right now off the top of my head. I didn't expect to be talking about this,
Wow.
but it was amazing. It was like, wow. And we
That
helped her
is
get started
so
with that
cool.
$1,000.
So, I mean, so I have to ask because this is so
Yep.
unconventional. You
Yep.
have a booth and you have this, I don't know, this 18-year-old or 19-year-old
Yep.
sophomore
Yep.
coming to the booth and saying, "Hey, I'm excited about, I'm excited about drones and I have this idea that
Yep.
I'm working on." And then you say, "Okay, great. Welcome to the 1517 family. Here's
Yep.
$1,000."
Yep. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, that and what we always tell people is that the $1,000 is a learning opportunity. It's a learning
Yeah.
opportunity for them to figure things out, and it's a learning opportunity for us too, because then we can get to kind of learn on the side of like, hey, like what's easy about this? What's hard about this? We get to see how a person executes. So when that person comes to us and says, "Hey, I'm so close to having a like a pilot ready with somebody. I'm ready to raise more funding." We now have a lot of narrative data points on how that person works and how they execute. So it's really easy for us at that point to make a decision about pre-seed funding of
It's
hey, would we
incredible.
work with this team? Because at the pre-seed, it's all about the team and it's all about that relationship. It's not about a spreadsheet. I can't say to a founder, "Hey, send me a spreadsheet with your financials," because there aren't any. But the grant is one way that we're able to suss that out. And the other is just building relationships with people over time. We've had many teams where
Huh.
maybe a grant wouldn't have helped them, but we'll say, "Hey, like, we'd like to work with you more right now." The ideal is when someone comes to us and says, "I'm not raising money yet, but I will be in 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
Like, how do I prep for this?" And I'm like, "Oh, good. I'm glad we're talking now." The worst case scenario is when someone sits down with me on Wednesday and expects money on Friday, especially if I don't know them, because it's really hard to like get up to speed on the team and do they have the attributes we're looking for. Anybody can have 3 good meetings with an investor, but the question is, can you do what you say over time? Can you
And
execute?
yeah,
Can you build? Can you deal with crisis? Like, I mean, all these things are important, and that's something that you can't just get in a meeting.
I think that's so awesome because you're catching them early. You're
Yeah.
forming this honest relationship that
Yep.
has no strings attached. I mean, they don't
Yep.
have to come to you for pre-seed. They can go
No, they
to,
don't. They can do, yeah, there's nothing, yeah, they don't have to come work with us
but
later. Yeah.
I guess it shows the virtue of your community
Yeah.
of that 20% of your portfolio are coming from that $1,000
Yeah.
grants. And
Yeah.
I think that's just remarkable. And you have so many more data points than the average VC has on the team, on the execution, on their
Yep.
progress, which is
Yep.
just phenomenal. So
Well, and sometimes we've gone to people and said, "Hey," and we do this both with grantees and portfolio companies. We have some portfolio companies right now where we can see that a cash infusion would be helpful to them.
Mhm.
And we can say, "Hey, I know you're thinking about a round in 4 months, but how would another 150K help you right now?" And they're like, "Oh, that's great. I was just on the phone this morning with a founder about that." Actually, this is a funny moment. The founder said like, "Hey, like, what if in the convertible note we said we could take up to 300K, maybe you guys do 150?" And I said, and we actually we wanted to do more cash than the 150. We wanted to do 250. He said, "Will you take 150?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do 150, but listen, like, are you saying that you want to market the other 150 to your other investors, or what are you saying?" He's like, "Well, I don't know. Like, I wonder if I should put it out to them." And I said, "Listen, they're not doing their job. If they're not coming to you right now saying, 'Hey, I want to put in more cash,' that's not my job to create an opportunity for them. My job is to create an opportunity between me and you."
Yeah.
And I want other people to come in and work on this. But I told that founder, I said, "We'll do the 150, but if you take more money on that note, I want first dibs." And he's like, "Okay, fair. That totally makes sense."
Danielle, this
And we
is
do that
so
with our
cool.
grantees too, where we'll say like, "Hey, you know what? It looks like you're kind of ready for like a larger cash infusion. Like, let's talk about what this could look like. And first off, do you really want to do this? This is like a 5 to 10 year commitment. It's a lot of pain and suffering to start a startup. And you have to be really into what you're doing, because there is no glory, especially the first couple of years. It's just a lot of work."
No. I couldn't agree more. And I already have somebody that right after this call from Stanford, I'm going to tell him to go and talk to you because I think this is just the perfect, I mean, I just love what you're doing. This is so incredible.
Yeah.
And I wish we could continue, but unfortunately
I know we're hitting the 20 minutes. I'll just say this to end, which is that if anybody listening wants to reach out, I'm just Danielle at 1517fund.com. You can email me. We work with students from all kinds of institutions. We work with people who have dropped out. We worked with people from community college. We've worked with people from four-year institutions. I don't care where you come from. In fact, in our pitch meetings, we don't even ask where you're going to school or any of that. Like, I just want to know who you are, what you're passionate about, and what you're building.
That is so cool. So Danielle, before we log off, I'm going to put you on the spot one more time.
Sure.
I'd love for you to tell me 3 words that you think best describe you.
Oh, man. Best describe me. Let's see.
Or that you would like somebody to describe you.
I'll just go with best describe me. I can be aspirational some other time. Be like heroic. No, just kidding. Friendly, curious, and goofy. I'll go with those 3 today.
I love it. Danielle, thank you so much for this call. Thank you for inviting me to the Teal Summit 6-7 years ago, which is one of the highlights of my sort of entrepreneurial path that I'm taking with me. And I really look forward to maintaining this relationship and keeping in touch.
Yeah, same. Thanks for inviting me.
Great.